Hello again. Now that we have our mountains drawn onto our map, what we're going to do now is draw some forests. The thing I should note about forests is that I would only draw a forest onto a map if it was like specifically important. Otherwise, by default, most terrain is covered in trees and forest anyways. So you usually don't really need to worry about it. But if you do want to draw forests, I'll show you a couple different ways how. So again, for those who are less confident with their drawing, I do have some stamp tools provided. The first here is a brush called Trees Shape Dyna, which I guess I named short for dynamic. And you can just size this up a bit. And what this will do is kind of paint trees onto your map however you like. Again, we have the same brush here, except this doesn't spread. Same with this one. We have another brush that does the exact same thing for trees. And again, you know, I have more here. Yeah. And another one, you know, however you wish to draw trees. Now another method that I like to use, and I wasn't going to mention this, but I should just mention this now, is I have this like iconography here for like wetlands. You can use that if you want. But what I like to do is I like to use this brush here. It's called Tree Brush. And you might look at this and your idea might be, well, that doesn't really look like a tree brush, but it is, and I'll show you why. So what we're gonna do with this is we're gonna draw patches here, and then we're gonna fill them in, and we're gonna have some other steps come a little bit later that's gonna make that look pretty interesting. But of course, filling this in takes forever. So I created a quick fill texture that will help speed up the process. So we can go to our paint bucket tool, and then we can hit pattern. And I already have it selected, but here is the texture that is provided with the course. It's just called forest. And then you want to make sure that there's no closed spaces. And you want to make sure that also the brush size you're using kind of matches the texture. So we'll be working with that. So we're going to add a few trees. Just kind of go slow. Kind of like to outline the mountains. I don't think that'll be very good. So we can just drop the opacity down to one, the tolerance down to 1. So that way it hopefully doesn't break the boundary too much. Okay, again, here. Draw another one down here. Okay, we'll worry about that later. Mm. And all right, like we should have something here. Just a big empty spot. Not really sure why this one isn't filling. All right, we can name this layer forest. Okay, so now what we can do is we can hold control, click on the layer here, select, modify, contract by 1, and then hit the add mask button. And we'll click on our mask. And then in your default brushes, we'll go to soft round. We'll increase this in size just a little bit. And then we'll add opacity. And then what we'll do is we'll just kind of slowly paint that that back in right there. Just a little bit. Just to kind of give it some form. And then from there we're gonna make a new layer. Go back down to map pen 1. We can go down to 5 for the size here. And we're just going to outline the very bottom of these little patches here. Okay, now that we have that filled in, we can create a new layer, or sorry, we can group these. We just name that forest style 1. If you want, we can also just go and use our other bush here. And you know, if you want to fill in some forest this way, actually think this might look better for this particular map, maybe. Just kind of add in some forests. So when you're using these kind of stamp tools, you want to make sure that they don't overlap, because that'll look weird. So we'll just draw in some forest this way, see how that looks. You can really just take your time with this, you know, there's no real rush for it. Again, it's like I said, you really discover a lot of the stories just from drawing the map. And was Tolkien's advice to always work with a map. So, you know, if you don't work with a map, if you're writing the story without a map, you're gonna run into some weird problems, or your story's just not gonna. Your story's just gonna lack fundamental depth. Um, like with my writing, I spend so much time working with the map. It's kind of ridiculous. It's not the funnest thing to do, but if you really want to do your diligence and make sure that everything lines up, then it's a good idea to do that. You know, if you have one character 100 miles away and another character 200 miles away, you know, and there's like no cars or anything, and suddenly they're talking to each other the next day, that's just a little weird. That's just kind of a plot hole, and people will pick that stuff apart pretty heavily. Um, I kind of like this since we used stamped mountains, stamped trees kind of looks better for this particular map. Just add a few more here. So what I like to do with these stamped trees is I kind of like to give them some fill. So what you can do is go to the magic wand tool, just click the area around them, Control Shift I to invert the layer, make a new layer under the tree layer. I take like a shade of gray, like a good mid-tone maybe, and just kind of hit the fill tool. And then you can kind of lower the opacity to something you like better. And that kind of gives the trees a little bit of a... Okay, well, I didn't mean to do this, but I filled that with the tree texture. But that actually seems to work pretty well, so I'll just stick with that. I want to give it like a solid gray fill, but, you know, it's okay. Happy accidents, as they sometimes say, right? I'm just making sure to erase all these little areas here. Now that I'm looking at the tree texture fill in this context, it looks like it could actually make a really good grass fill as well. Okay, so now we have our forests.